I'm so excited to introduce our first speaker, and that is Dan Geraci. I hope I said that right. I should have checked before. But Dan is currently the President and Chief Operating Officer of Freefall Aerospace, a developer of communications infrastructure, and it's based in Tucson, Arizona. Now, prior to Freefall, Dan was President of Voyager Space Services, which is a provider of business operating services to emerging space companies, is all familiar with it, a unit of Voyager Space. Dan is also the chairman of the board of directors of the Planetary Society, which is the world's largest space advocacy group promoting the robotic and human exploration of space. You can still join that. Cool group to be a part of. And that was founded by Carl Sagan, Bruce Murray, and Lou Friedman. And Bill Nye, the science guy. Watched him growing up. Pretty cool. He's the current CEO and was elected to the board in 2003 and has been the chairman since 2006. So he has more than 35 years of experience as a senior executive in the investment and asset management industries. His prior roles include managing partner and co-founder of Sygenis Investment Partners, president and CEO of Phoenix Investment Partners, president and CEO of Pioneer Investment Management USA, president of Fidelity Investments Private Wealth Management Group, and other executive positions at Fidelity, Midland, Wylam Capital, and E.F. Hutton. Over the years, Dan has served on a number of boards and nonprofits in Boston, New York City, Toronto, and Connecticut. He's a member of the board of Foundation for the Future, focused on space policy and workspace development for the space economy. He's a past board member of Junior Achievement and a supporter of Best Buddies International. He currently lives in Seabrook, Texas, and he works in Tucson, Arizona. So everybody, let's join and welcome Dan. Dan, we're so glad to have you here and talk about something that everybody loves about, money, but also talking about something that we all love to talk about, which is space.
For sure. And thank you. Thank you so much, Meredith. It's great to be here again. I thought, we're talking about finances, and this is something that several of us talk about quite often. And I think what's interesting, it's really the state of investment in the new space economy, if you will, that is what I wanted to focus on. We're at an interesting point right now. If you go back a year, if you go back 5 years, it's been a dramatic shift. And the most important thing is, and it's something I did several months ago, but I took an old chart of the rise of the tech industry, the tech boom in the mid 90s, all the way through into the early 2000s. And you could see critical points in there where certain companies emerged at the beginning, and then today they're just trivia questions. It's the same thing when you put space over it. And the thing that I want to stress is that we're in what I would refer to as kind of the first wave of maturation of this new space economy, where we've had some scar tissue built up around certain companies and around the industry as a whole. And the mindset of investors has shifted. In the beginning, like with any emerging, exciting, cool industry segment, which space is all of those things, there's just a kind of a frenzy of getting your hands on any company you can, writing checks to lots of young companies because you have no idea who's going to succeed. But there are so many with such great stories, with such great presentations, that you want to make sure that you get, put your chip on every number you can. And that was very much the case. And I can think of numerous large investors or just individuals who've kind of made it a hobby, who have written lots of little checks to a lot of little companies. Some of those have worked out incredibly well. Some of those will never be heard from again. And then we have some failures, which more recently has brought about this shift where people sit back and say, gee, I never thought that company would be out of business. I never thought that bank would go under and nearly create an extinction event for a number of space companies, as was the case with Silicon Valley Bank, and that ripple effect that's happened throughout the industry. And so now, as I sit here as a president of an emerging young space-related company, I'm seeing a difference in how investors are thinking. We all know the capital has gotten a little bit shy, that it's dried up a little bit. We also know there's still a lot of dry powder on the sidelines, but it's much more fussy about who it's going to talk to and who it's going to write a check to. And so it's harder and harder to find capital unless you have very substantial, more mature technology. The definition of that, well, having SIBRs and STTRs and other forms of grants is helpful because it at least says someone else has done a little bit of due diligence on the companies. But at the same time, SIBRs, as we know, unfortunately, is not the sign of what is going to be a successful company, only because those companies continue to fail at an alarming rate 1 or 2 years after they get their SIBRs. And it sustains them, and it can be a good mask for the fact that they are still not well enough established, that they haven't raised private capital. And so investors are more careful today. They have a memory from 25 years ago, but they more importantly are much more suspect when you look at certain sectors like launch, which we've talked about ad nauseum, where there's, I don't know, I think we're still at around 160 launch companies, possibly more. We know that's not sustainable. And so picking who is going to emerge becomes a challenge. And this is going to be the case for every segment of the new space economy. And so finding capital is going to be more challenging. If you have a contract, that puts you well above the crowd. If you have maybe a level 2 or other forms of grants, okay, you've got some sustainability. But at the end of the day, if your technology is not unique, if you don't have great differentiation going for you, if you're not the darling of DoD in some way, shape, or form, if you're not a partner of a major player who wants to use your technology and is giving you non-dilutive money to develop it, which is really important, then it's hard to be heard in that crowd. And I think that as we go forward now over the next couple of years, this maturation is going to continue. More companies will rise up, several will fall below. Again, back to the launch industry, seeing certain companies get launch facility assignment at Kennedy, the way that Phantom and Viaspace did from the government. Okay, that separates them from the pack. 2 years ago, they were part of the pack. Now they've emerged. We always knew that, yeah, they had promise. Now the votes are being cast with specific work, with money, with accessibility, with facilities, with launch access. And so this separation is going to continue to happen. Will there be consolidation? Of course. Will there be a lot of acquisitions? Maybe. If you're a larger company and you're looking to acquire somebody, or you want to be acquired because you're not doing as well as you might have thought, unless you have something of value to add to that acquirer's business, there's no real reason to consolidate. It's going to be more by way of the failure of a lot of companies and going out of business, and those good people being snatched up by someone else, as we saw in the wake of Virgin, with a lot of people being recruited very aggressively, literally hours later, online and everywhere else. So I would look for, survival of the fittest is going to be the rule. And capital is going to be reserved for only those who have the wherewithal to prove, or at least convince investors that there's a very bright future. I think in terms of going public for a lot of companies, it's going to be a challenge. I personally, having spent most of my breathing life in that industry, going public is not the best solution for the vast majority of companies in any industry. Yes, we have a capital intensive industry, and it's true that it's a great place to get access to capital. But I think that there's going to be enough capital in other areas, in private areas, for most companies to succeed. If you're fortunate enough to get government contracts, which is one of the drivers that makes the new space economy much more resilient than tech 25 years ago, is because there is a permanent 24/7, 365 customer who is immune to market winds and forces, and that's the US government, specifically the Department of Defense. They are always there buying. Space Force is trying to buy every piece of technology it can get its hands on. That wasn't the case with high tech, so it was going to get whipped by the market forces 25 years ago. But the sustainability of this economy is going to be due in large part, especially early, to the appetite of the government, which means going public doesn't become the necessity that some people might. And many of us have talked, and Tim and Arena, this is a big issue. Is the government trying to dampen the private capital markets with some of the talk that's going on about policy with regard to companies being required to go public? This is not something that's good for the new space economy. It's not good for the entire economy. And so going public is something that most companies, if they can avoid it, should, especially if you're young. We saw what happened to SPACs, and that was good old fashioned greed that drove that part of the market. That's all it was. Something that drives, investors and investments very heavily. Somebody made money, but look at the result. Are those companies better off? And yes, there are some very good companies that went via SPAC, and that was because the companies themselves were solid. The fundamentals were solid. The technology was solid. Intuitive Machines is a great example of a really successful company coming up that used a SPAC. But at the end of the day, when you go public, you're living on a 90-day reporting cycle now. You are no longer able to run your company like a private company and make decisions for the long term that your handful of investors will understand. Now you have an earnings report to do every 90 days. You have to do an earnings call. You have analysts who don't understand the new space economy yet. This is not aerospace. This is not high tech. This is a unique segment. And the ability to do due diligence and analysis is also unique. And there's just not a lot of it right now. So at the end of the day, I'm hoping that more companies will stay private than go public. I'm assuming that they will. I think, SpaceX has shown people, even if the reasons and rationale are different, then you can stay private for quite a long time. Maybe they spin Starlink public. That's my personal view. But I think that companies coming up need to focus on just getting the technology right and getting smart investors who understand the technology, who understand that space is a 10 to 15-year investment, not a 3-year investment the way a traditional VC would see it. And so the VCs have to be, this is a market for patient capital. That's the best way I can put it. But anyway, I'll stop and take questions if there are any. This is something we can go on about for days.
All right. It sounds like we have a question coming in from Anara. She wants to know, how can we convince larger companies across various industries to take on space strategy for a percentage of their operations? Are there ways to get more capital allocated for space from the established industries such as oil, mining, and energy?
That's a great question, because there have been numerous reports that have come out from every big consulting firm, and Harvard Business School weighed in saying that hey, every company is going to need to have a space strategy in the next 10 years. Everybody's going to have to figure out what that means. And a lot of people say, well, what does that have to do with this industry or that industry? But if we believe that we are finally now on the verge of building an economy in orbit, whether it's LEO or MEO or GEO, depending on where somebody wants to park, or if we're going to have the true cislunar economy and we're going to have things happening on the moon or Mars or the asteroids, then there isn't a business that isn't touched by that. And so if you're Caterpillar, then you're working on the heavy equipment and training the operators that are going to be the ones. It's not going to be some newfangled space heavy equipment company that's going to be doing work on the moon or Mars. It's going to be Caterpillar. It's going to be companies like that. It's going to be the big mining companies that are going to lead the charge on asteroid mining or mining from regolith on the moon or Mars. And food production. We've seen a lot of food production issues, and pharma, who can do a better job of making drugs in low gravity, and so companies will start to figure it out when it becomes a bigger topic. You need one company to pursue it, and then suddenly the competitive forces light up, and everybody says, "Uh-oh, we better do that." We better have an answer for that. And it's going to come down to the boards of directors who are really going to start driving this by demanding that there be a solution. You talk about oil and gas. There's such a transfer of technology and skills, around Houston, where I am, down by the Johnson Space Center. There's a lot of former NASA technicians who lost their jobs that are being retrained. To do other things inside the space industry. Oil and gas people who have shifted, who are great technicians, to the space industry. So it's going to happen, but some are going to lead, and there will be far more that follow, unfortunately.
And that's a really good point too, for people that might be watching outside of the space community, or there's always that question of, well, but I've been doing oil and gas, or I've been doing this type of finance my whole life. But this is a new thing. This is a new revolution. And now is the time where, if you have that interest, or you're looking to take your career in a different direction,
Yep.
Start the contacts now. Start reaching out to people such as yourself and find out where you could make that transition.
You can take a lesson, whether you prefer to or not, from the Saudis, who have decided that they're going to be the leaders in resource development off planet. Their big interest and focused on space is to develop resources, whether it's mining or on the moon or Mars. They're putting a lot of money into researching this and having facilities and looking at buying stations and things like this, where they could take their skill set or their what they've developed a reputation and a capability set around off the planet. And I think you're going to see this because the amount of labor that's going to be willing to go off planet. There are 140 some odd space agencies on this planet right now. And if you took a poll, people would think there were 6. Okay. And there's supposed to be another 20 or something coming on this year. And when you look at that, there's a reason, because they now have an ability to have a space economy. And this gets to Anara's question. It's going to come from the national, will level up, and it's going to drag everybody with it. People can be involved in the space economy. Countries can be involved. They can do something where they were unable to do it before. And this is why it's going to be a truly global initiative. It's going to be because these countries, it's always been the rite of passage to be somehow involved in space for a country. And suddenly there's going to be 200 countries that are going to be able to play some role, whatever that role is, even if it's, hey, I'm a small island nation, but I can put a spaceport here and you can launch from my island. It's going to be things like that.
Absolutely. Don't forget, everyone that's watching, if you have any questions, to put them in the chat below. We would love to hear you get involved in the conversation. And another thing too, I think it'll streamline from that, Dan, is you got to do your research as well. Because while there are all of these established space companies and people that are doing it the right way, There's also people that are saying this is an opportunity to go under the table and find ways to get money and to take your money. And if you don't know what you're investing in or you're getting involved in, you could find yourself in trouble really fast.
I'm looking at some of these questions that are popping up, and you're making a good point. I think, Meredith, that due diligence is the most important thing. Do people really know how to assess a company? And you can do financial due diligence. That's the easier part, believe it or not. It's the technological due diligence that requires a lot of work. And there's a couple of great companies. One of them, Summit Space Corporation, Carl Baker's company, that really does really deep due diligence on technologies, especially around space. In terms of what the most enticing part of space infrastructure is, that would get investors involved. I think the general answer when it comes to investors is, there's an old rule from the great money manager Peter Lynch, who said, invest in what you know. And so if there are topics, areas that people feel like they're comfortable with, or that they just get it. Oh yeah, sure, making drugs in space. Gee, that makes sense. You can make a better molecule, they say. Okay, that's great. Food. Gee, the ability to grow food in harsh environments. Well, that's happening right now in the Middle East with a number of initiatives. You look at Orbit Fab and their brilliant marketing at the very beginning, gas stations in space. I mean, people get that in a nanosecond. Okay, yeah, you have to refuel things. Those are the types of things that will get more of the individual investor involved. Then you move up to family offices, which is where I think, by the way, is the sweet spot for most new space companies to find capital, because they have the same investment time horizon that you need, which is a 10 to 15 year perspective. It's going to be technology that's differentiated, that'll solve basic problems: propulsion, transportation, facilities, manufacturing. Cislunar Industries is a great one, with their ability to help this kind of, to simplify it, the recycling in orbit of a lot of the debris and other material that we need to get rid of without just burning it up on reentry. So it's going to be things like that. I think international collaboration, to get to Giuseppe's question, data is going to be probably one of the biggest industries, period, bar none, for the space economy. And that's why we're doing what we're doing here at Freefall and a lot of others. That data is there. It's got to come down, so the ground station industry, as well as just the processing and orbital processing facilities, which I think is going to be a solution for the lack of downlink capacity we're going to have. But international, it's what I was getting to a minute ago. All of these countries have a role to play. Europe's aggressive, and within Europe, Italy especially is aggressive, Germany, and of course the UK. But I think that we're on the verge of seeing far more collaboration, because this is the one industry where collaboration is almost a requirement. It's not simply a necessity, it's a requirement, because no one can do space alone. And that's the reality. Nobody can do it alone.
Space alone. What a great line to leave you with from Dan. Thank you so much from Freefall Aerospace. We're glad to have you on today.
My pleasure.